Thank you, Brianna and Megan, for bringing me back. This is actually the third year. Very grateful that you're still interested in what I have to say. And of course, it's about the Shakers, all three topics related to the Shakers. And I'll mention the other two in this program. Uh, I'm going to show you a lot of pictures. I'm hopefully going to play some music if it will work. And I'm going to really, even though it was announced to focus on the song, "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple," which I will spend a lot of time talking about. It's really to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Aaron Copland, great composer, American composer, meeting the Shakers in Shaker Heights in 1974. And that was the only meeting between Copland and the Shakers. And I am very pleased to say I was the one who set it up. And I'll show you pictures from it and play an excerpt from the Shaker Heights teacher workshop that was done in 1974, where Copland wasn't there, but the Shakers were. Now, this title picture here, at the bottom, you see the picture of Aaron Copland meeting Sister Mildred Barker, the Shaker from Maine, who was there for the teacher workshop, not to meet Copland. She didn't know that that was going to happen. That just happenstance that Aaron Copland was in town for Aaron Copland Week, sponsored by the Cleveland Orchestra. And I went to many of the events myself, being studying musicology and very interested in American music. That's my specialty. Naturally, I wanted to go to many events that featured Aaron Copland's music, including a film that he wrote the music for, of Mice and Men, that was done at the Art Museum, if I recall. And so there were many events that were held during the week. And because he was in town, I called him up at his hotel, and he graciously agreed to meet the Shakers very briefly before he was to speak to a class of graduate students at Case Western Reserve. Now, the other pictures there on that title slide shows the books that I've done. Two books about simple gifts, the Shaker dance song. It's not a hymn, it's a dance song. The one on the left is a shorter book I did first, The Story of Simple Gifts, Joseph Brackett's Shaker Dance Song. And then on the right is a multimedia version with audio and video clips. And if any of you are teachers, you might be especially interested in that if you're going to deal with simple gifts, especially. That has audio and video clips on it, as well as about the song, of course, and about the man who wrote it. Many people still say it's an anonymous Shaker hymn, and it's not anonymous and it's not a hymn. So I'll tell you why as we go through. Now, Aaron Copland, I mentioned, he met the Shakers in 1974, and he was gracious enough to sign a copy of his music score. You see it on the left. It's a copy for another survey that I did much later at another location. But that is a copy of his music that he signed to two Shakers, Sister Mildred Barker and Sister Frances Carr, in 1974. And he dated it also. And on the right is another signature of his when I interviewed him in 1980 at his home in upstate New York. And I'll tell you about that when we get to that portion. I'd like to dedicate this program in memory of Sister Ruth Mildred Barker. She was the greatest Shaker singer I've met. And you see her dates there. She just exuded joy and loved music so much, loved to sing Shaker songs and other religious songs especially. She was just a treasure. Everybody loved her. She was so warm. You can see the picture on the left. She's laughing. I'm laughing. I don't know what it was about, but that's the way she was, very joyous. On the right is a picture from Life magazine that was taken around 1967 by a well-known photographer, name escapes me, but there was a feature article in Life magazine in 1967. Also in Smithsonian Magazine in 1974, September of 1974, Sister Mildred was featured on the cover of the magazine, playing the organ and singing one of her favorite hymns, Progress. And the thing she told me about before she started laughing was she didn't like the picture because they took it with her mouth open while she was singing. She didn't like that at all. But on the right is a copy of the hymn, Progress, from a Shaker hymnal, 1884 hymnal. And you see it's in four parts, just like in most hymnals. So all Shaker music is not just the single melodies. It was also a four-part harmony that you find in many of the hymnals in many churches. Now, this book, if you're interested in knowing more about the music, this is a book I put together a few years ago. Gentle Words, The Meaning and Message of Shaker Music. And it has the words, no music, the lyrics to 25 Shaker spirituals. I'm going to call them Shaker spirituals because there are three different kinds of Shaker music. There are Shaker songs, which is simple gifts. There are Shaker hymns, which are usually more than one verse. Simple Gifts has only one verse. And then there are anthems, which are longer pieces, usually like church choirs would sing in any of the churches. So those were the three types of music. And it's best to call them spirituals because, like Afro-American spirituals or Black spirituals, these are white spirituals or Afro-American spirituals. The Shakers originally came from England, as you'll see in a minute. And speaking about that, this is a new multimedia collection I just produced, Shaker Music Miscellany, and the cover is done by my artistic wife. I must give her some credit. And on the right is the contents of 10 Shaker spirituals that I worked in over the years. And it covers a wide range of time. The first one, Mother Ann's song from 1783, and the last one, which is the last Shaker song I think that has been written, My Shaker Home, 1959. So you get an idea of how widespread Shaker music is. Enormous amount of music. I've looked at thousands of tunes and texts and have no way to know how many there are. They're well over, I would say, over 20,000 Shaker spirituals that exist today in manuscript books and in printed Shaker hymnals. They did both. They have both. And also on this, this is a DVD, a ROM, that you have to play on a CD DVD player or computer if you have it on there. And it also has the complete teacher workshop from 1974, which I had my little cassette recorder, so the quality isn't very good, but it is the whole workshop, including the Shakers talking about their heritage and also singing some of the Shaker music. So we'll hear a brief excerpt from that. But also on this, there's the interview with Aaron Copland that I did in 1980, and also my radio appearances on WGBH radio in Boston, in which I had a program about Shaker music. Sabbath Day Lake is the place where the remaining Shaker community exists. There were originally a lot more, which I'll show you in just a little bit. But this on the left is the Shaker Meeting House, 1794. It has been restored in the last few years. A new roof was put on, I know. But that is the original building from 1794. It's amazing. It's a beautiful structure. And down below is the Shakers as they were in 1980s. Now, of these 8 Shakers, only one Shaker remains, and that's Brother Arnold Had here down at the bottom. And he is the last remaining of the 8 Shakers shown here. Sister Mildred Barker is right here, and another man who had met Aaron Copland was known as Dr. Theodore Johnson. He eventually joined the Shakers and became Brother Theodore Johnson. He was a great scholar, and he wrote a lot about the Shaker heritage while he was a member there. So all of the others are no longer there. They passed on, or in the case of this man here, his name was Wayne. He left the village and went out on his own. Simple Gifts. As you can see, the United Society of Shakers, as they're known, at Sabbath Day Lake, Maine, recorded the song in 1976 for Rounder Records. The CD version, the cover is not there, was released in 1996. And the complete words and to this one verse song without the repeats is the way they're going to sing it. If I can get this to work. I have a feeling it's not going to play. I'm going to have trouble with this music. Yep. Let's see, what did I do?
Roger, if you want to get back to the presentation,
Yeah.
go to slideshow at the top
Yep.
and then from current slide.
Okay. Thank you.
Hmm.
Okay. I'm afraid I'm not going to get to play all these music or any of these music. It was working fine, of course, when I did it on my own computer. So let's keep going. What do we have here? Okay. 2 years ago, the Shaker Historical Society and the Public Library were kind enough to invite me to come in person to do a program on the Shakers at Shaker Heights, now Shaker Heights, which was known as North Union. And I put together a book, which actually was my PhD dissertation that I think maybe Brianna mentioned at Case Western Reserve. And it took many years before I got it published, but glad that I finally got it out. And at the bottom right there, you'll see it looks like a lot of scribbling there. That's actually music. And the music that Shakers used were letters of the alphabet. It was a kind of shorthand. They called it the letteral system. And it was alphabet music notation. They used letters of the alphabet for the pitches, the same pitches that were in regular music notation. And the words are printed underneath there. May we ever be united with this little happy band who are traveling on to Zion, all united, heart and hand, bearing one another's burdens, mutual condescension reigns, while we move in heavenly order on Mount Zion's blissful plains. Now, I'd sing that for you, but I'm of the age where my voice is gone, so I'll have to beg off on it. But I do have a recording of it uh, if you want to hear it. It's on this on one of the recordings that I have. Now, this is an example again of the letteral notation. This is a very important hymn called On the Landing of Mother Ann in America from North Union around 1860. Now, who is Mother Ann, you might wonder? Well, she is the spiritual head of the Shakers. And this hymn was written in tribute to her when she came to America, which is another anniversary being celebrated this year. They came to America on August 6th, 1774. So it's the 250th anniversary of the Shakers' arrival in America. And there's a copy of it transcribed into notation from one of my songbooks, Love is Little, a sampling of Shaker spirituals. And you'll see there are 4 verses to the hymn. And it's very much like a typical song that they would have written in the 19th century. Not a extremely difficult range to sing from, but the idea was to do repeats and to have it in 2 sections. The Shakers were always concerned about symmetry. In their meeting houses, well, the windows were structured in a symmetrical fashion, and the same with the music. It's basically in 2 sections, an A section up here, the first few measures, and then the B section down here. And sometimes those are repeated and sometimes not. It wasn't always consistent. But this is an example of a 19th century Shaker hymn tune. Now it's a hymn because it has more than one verse. So that's the reason. I don't think this will play. No. All right. Now, Mother Ann's song, uh, she did write some music now, Mother Ann, there are no likenesses of her surviving. On the internet, you may see pictures supposedly of her. They're not. That's not accurate. There are no pictures, no images of Mother Ann. She died in 1784. So you think, why would there be any pictures back then before photography, I think. Uh, but she did write music, and some of her music was written down in later on in manuscript books. And this is a page from a Shaker manuscript book. And at the top, you see Mother Ann's song. And again, without any words, only the letteral notation, which were sung to syllables. If I could play this, you'd hear it, of la and lo or lodal. They used the syllables. Now, where did this come from? This came from England and Scotland and maybe Ireland too, something called mouth music. I don't know if you know anything about that, but there were people, particularly when they were working, women who were working, like washing laundry and things like that, would hum tunes, and they wouldn't necessarily have any words. And it was called mouth music. And that's the tradition the Shakers had when they came to America. So most of these tunes, if they have any text, they're what we call nonsense things like vium vom vom. That's not, obviously anything that's particular. It's just syllables. But that's what they used in the very beginning when they first arrived in America, because the first people were from England, from Manchester, England. That's where Mother Ann came from. Right, that keeps coming up. Okay, and I'm speaking of Mother
Roger,
Ann.
if
Yes,
you want to try to put your username and password in that box, it might then play the music.
I can't really, unfortunately, see my password. I
Okay.
don't. I don't have it available.
Okay.
So I'm just going to have to. I'm have to talk and not play the music. I'm sorry for that, but if you're really interested, I have recordings. But going on here, Mother Ann Lee, you see her date, 1736, 1784. She was only 48 when she died. There were much persecution on the early Shakers because they came from England. And during the American Revolution, many people thought they were pro-British, which I don't think they were. They weren't pro anything. They were pro Shakers, really. But they were persecuted severely and beaten. Mother Ann was beaten on several occasions, dragged around, and it's just terrible when you read the descriptions. But the Shakers always uh, let that go and didn't hold anything against people, always had a positive outlook on life. And she was an admirable person. If you want to read more about her, I'd recommend this book, And the Word, by Richard Francis, which is a biography of Anne Lee, who had various titles associated with her, a female messiah or the woman clothed with the sun. Those were terms that were given to her because she had this kind of angelic way about her that impressed everybody who met her, whether they were educated or not educated, it didn't matter. She supposedly was a very charismatic person. And that's the why she was still quoted and still quoted today by the Shakers in Maine. She's just an amazing person in history. And you see, she was born on February 29th. That tells you something, on a leap year day in 1736. And she died at Waterfleet, New York in 1784. Now, these on the right are some pictures that were done in magazines at the time in the 19th century of the Shaker dress, the Shaker costumes. And the two figures on the ends, the woman on the right with her hands out and the man on the other end with his hands out, those were dance positions that they had. When they marched in to the meeting house, they would march in usually with their hands upward, bringing in the heavenly spirit, so to speak. And that was the reason they did that. And the other costumes are mostly the elders, I believe, who wore the long waistcoats or whatever they were called then, and the wide brim hats too. And down below is the Shaker sisters. On the right is a more everyday appearance. On the left is what they call a fancy bonnet here, which I still remember the Shakers wearing that especially when they went out someplace to meet people, they would wear the fancy bonnet. Uh, but eventually they did away with that and didn't require the sisters to wear the bonnet. On the left is a list of all the Shaker communities. There were 24 from 1787 to 1898. That's a lot of communities there, and you can see the dates if you can read them all. I'll just point out number 9 here, Alfred, Maine, from 1793 to 1931. That is the place where the Gift to Be Simple supposedly was written by a man named Joseph Brackett, who I'll tell you about in a minute. But also, if you're interested in Ohio, there were 4 communities. First one is Union Village, 1805 to 1912. Then that's near Lebanon, Ohio. Those are you in Ohio. And then the next was Watervliet, Ohio. It was near Dayton, and I won't give the dates. And then, of course, North Union, I talked about 1822 to 1889, which is now Shaker Heights. And then the last one was Whitewater, Ohio, 1824 to 1907. And that was located north of Cincinnati. And there still are some buildings remaining from that community, and including the meeting house. The only Shaker meeting house still in existence in Ohio is located there, and I understand they're restoring it now. I think it's owned by the county. I think it's a county park, and they are restoring the Shaker meeting house. So maybe someday that'll be open to the public. On the left are some of the other communal societies that were around in America in the 19th century, especially, particularly Germans in Pennsylvania, the Harmony Society, for example, and General Economy, which is Moravian. And then there's one in Ohio, Zor Separatist, which I think there is a Zor, Ohio, and that's where they were located. I went to a conference there a few years ago. And United Order, which was Mormon, which is now located in Kirtland, Ohio. Those of you who may know about that, I went out there on a visit one time and had a nice visit through the church in Kirtland, the Mormon church. Excuse me, I have to have some water. Getting hoarse. But you see that most of the Shaker communities were up in the north, up here in the Midwest. Only a few were in the South, actually 2 in Georgia, White Oak, Georgia, and Narcoossee, Florida. That name may sound familiar. That's not part of Disney World. This is what the Shaker told me years ago, that the land that they had back in the early 20th century eventually became part of Disney World. So that's something for interest or not interest. Now, this isn't going to play. I'll have to skip that. It's a video. Now, this is the picture of the man who wrote "'Tis the Gift to Be Simple," Elder Joseph Brackett. You see his date, 1797 to 1882. Spiritual leader in the main ministry at Alfred and New Gloucester, which is today Sabbath Day Lake, the last remaining Shaker community. He was believed to have composed the song in 1848 while at Alfred, Maine, which was another Shaker community. Elder Joseph was born in Cumberland, Maine, May 6, 1797. Every year on May 6th, I like to celebrate his birthday online, and we have a Joseph Brackett Day. So if you're around, if you can remember on May 6th, you can sing or play "'Tis the Gift to Be Simple" on his birthday. He was given the first name of Elisha at birth, but later was changed to his father's first name after the family name, and after the family had joined the Shaker community in Gorham, Maine, which was another location. His father's farm property helped to form the nucleus of the new Shaker community in Gorham. Joseph Jr., as he was sometimes known, lived on to serve as the head of the main Shaker societies. That's all of the Shaker communities, of which there were 2 or 3, I think, around at that time. Another of his songs that became popular in the 20th century was titled "The True Vine." It was composed at New Gloucester, Maine in 1856. And there's an arrangement by Conrad Held for soprano and piano, which is on a recording I did, Celestial Praises, which I'll show you a picture of, and there's a link for it too, if you're interested. Now, the Shaker song is a dance song. Now, you're wondering, why does everybody call it a hymn and sing it in a very slow manner? I think it's because they just don't know, or maybe if they do know, they don't care. It's up to the people to decide how to perform it. But most of the time, you'll hear it as a slow song, like a ballad. And really, it was meant to be done at a brisk tempo as a dance song. This is a print, a Currier and Ives print from the 19th century. And these are the Shakers, always separate, men and women separate, women on the left, men on the right, and all sorts of men. You have a tall man here, short, fat guy, bald headed guy, and an Afro American back here. The Shakers were not discriminatory in the 19th century when many people were. Anybody was welcome in the Shaker communities. So there wasn't any discrimination, but of course they lived separate. Men and women were separate. It's a celibate community. They talk about the 3 C's: confession of sins, the celibacy, and what's the third? My memory's failing. But they are definitely a celibate Protestant community. The True Vine I mentioned before. Let's close that. On the right is the original manuscript, again with a letteral notation, EGA, the first 3 notes. And over here, I've transcribed it, originally a fifth lower. I transcribed it into modern notation so that people can perform it. And this is the tune, but it was written by Elder Joseph Brackett. And my guess, he wrote other songs. I didn't have the time to go through all the manuscripts to find any other songs that he may have written, but I'm sure he probably wrote more. There's a picture of him that they have hanging today at Sabbath-Day Lake. If you were to go to Sabbath-Day Lake, and it is a museum, I don't think it's open now, but during the museum season, particularly in the spring and summer, you can go and have a tour through some of the buildings there, and you might go into the meeting room in the Center family dwelling, and in the meeting room is a portrait of Elder Joseph Brackett, and that's who you see there on the right. And on the left is from the Shaker Manifesto, their publication that they put out for many years to the world's people, as they called them, non-Shakers. And people could buy this newspaper. It was really like a newspaper. And they could read all about the Shakers and what they were doing and what their beliefs were. And it sometimes included a piece of music too. So it was meant to reach the world. They weren't totally cut off from the world. They did business with the world, very much like the Amish. They grew their own crops. They sold their own crops. They also sold furniture and many other farm tools and things like that. So they were not separate from the world. It's not like a monastery. They weren't cut off from the world. This is actually the first publication that I saw that mentioned Joseph Brackett as the man who wrote The Gift to Be Simple. Elder Joseph Brackett, as I said, was born on May 6, 1797. But I won't read all of this. I just want to read the last part. Although at Joseph Brackett's death, our last direct link with Gorham's consecrated band passes into history, it may be said to live on in what proved to be his most enduring work. Certainly his experience in the struggling young Gorham society helped to form him as a man and entered into his touchingly beautiful expression of faith, the now famed The Gift to Be Simple, which is "'Tis the Gift to Be Simple." Today it's also known as The Gift to Be Simple. So he's known because so much of the song, but he was well known to the Shakers, and especially to Sister Mildred, who heard about him all the time when she was growing up. She went to the Shakers I believe she was about 6 years old in 1903, and she remained the rest of her life. So she was there for a long time, as many people were. The thing was, when young children came to the Shakers, when they reached the age of 21, they were given the opportunity to leave if they wished, or they could stay on and sign what they call the covenant, which would make them official members of the Shaker community. Now, how was the song rediscovered in the 20th century? Uh, Simple Gifts, as it's also known, was popular among the Shakers during the 19th century and was included in at least 19 music manuscripts, but was never printed in any of their printed hymnals. It was originally titled Simple Gifts or Dancing Song, or by its first name, but not The Gift to Be Simple or Tis a Gift to Be Simple, which I'll tell you about in a minute. The first modern edition of the Shaker song was included in an article, Shaker Songs by Edward Deming Andrews, in the Musical Quarterly, October of 1937. That's a music publication. It was identified incorrectly as probably first sung at Hancock, Massachusetts, that is, about 1849. That's because Edward Andrews didn't know exactly where it came from. But then he wrote a book a few years later, published in 1940, which was called The Gift to Be Simple: Songs, Dances, Rituals of the American Shakers. That book is now still available. It's quite popular, available in paperback, but it originally came out in 1940. And in there, he said that one manuscript states that the song was composed by the Alfred Ministry, June 28th, 1848. I've never been able to find that citation. It must have been in some manuscript that he had, which somehow disappeared, because I looked at Edward Andrews' collection, which is at the Winterthur Museum in Delaware, and I didn't see that date. So it probably was from something else he had. It was, and he goes on to say it was a rather lively piece, Shaker Allegro in the original manuscript. This was the book that Aaron Copland found in a library in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and used the Shaker tune in his famous ballet, Appalachian Spring, which I consider one of the greatest American works, and said it as a rather lively piece, as Andrews said. So Copland said it as a lively piece. Many people have not. And there is a copy of the book, published in 1940, with a nice tribute by Mark Van Doren, the well-known writer and scholar, to Edward Deming Andrews, who was a scholar and historian, and one of the first people who founded the Hancock Shaker Village in Massachusetts, in Western Massachusetts. If you're ever out in that area, you might want to stop by and visit that Hancock Shaker Village. It's a very nice museum that they have there. And they do have sometimes music performances, I think, in the Meeting House. The Meeting House still stands there, or it's been restored, actually, and moved from another location. But the title is The Gift to Be Simple: Songs, Dances, and Rituals of the American Shakers, 1940. And then about 40 years later, I wrote the first article about The Gift to Be Simple, or Tis the Gift to Be Simple, in a magazine which is no longer published called the Shaker Messenger, which was a very popular magazine for a number of years. And they asked me in one of the early issues to write a brief article about the song, Simple Gifts, which I subtitled Shaker Simplicity in Song, which it certainly is. And it's just a very brief article, just telling people about Elder Joseph Brackett and about the song, and probably mentioning Aaron Copland too. And there is a cover of the booklet, which they published after I did the article, a very short booklet, which actually was somewhat of a bestseller. It went through 3 different editions. And it was very inexpensive. It was only about 10 or 12 pages. It was just my article and my interview with Aaron Copland and my edition of the song. So it was a very brief little booklet, but it sold very well, 3 different editions. And on the right is a copy of a broadside my artistic wife produced. She, I think, has been very helpful in producing these artistic broadsides. I've done a series of broadsides of different Shaker music, and this is, of course, the most popular one for Simple Gifts. Now, some of these images are from, I'm not sure if they're Shaker folk drawings, what they call spirit drawings that were received from the spirit world. It's just like some of their music was received from the spirit world. But some of these images, I believe, may have been from Shaker spirit drawings that my wife Gail found and used in this broadside. And I also interviewed Sister Mildred Barker, and in December of 1980 at Sabbath Day Lake, and she was told that Aaron Copland was interested to know the background of the song. I had just interviewed Aaron Copland a few months before that, and I told him about the background, and he was very interested because he didn't know anything about the song. He said he just found it in a book, the Andrews book, so he didn't know anything about it. And she also reminded of the LP album that I worked on with director at Plymouth Church of Shaker Heights called Harp of Joy. The director was John D. Herr, very fine gentleman and a great musician. And that was when it was done with my edition. That's the first, I think, alternate edition that was used other than the Andrews version, which is still the one most people use. And I don't think it's totally accurate. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. And she also mentions that she likes the simple version of the tune. She doesn't like the arrangement. She likes it just as it is, just as it is. And if I could play it, this is the version just as it is. This is just the plain tune by itself in two sections, an A section, a B section, 8 measures each, very symmetrical, and to be done at a lively pace. And it was recorded that way with the Chancel Choir of Plymouth Church Choir in Shaker Heights. I think this came out around 1976. If any of you know anybody at the Plymouth Church, they probably still have LP. It was an LP recording that was done in 1976. And then it was later, I later used it on one of my CDs, Gentle Words, a Shaker Music sampler, which has all Shaker music. But that, as far as I know, was the first alternate version of Simple Gifts that was done. This is a manuscript that I found. I'm sure it was in New York State, I believe. I can't remember which library. No, it was in Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland. They have one of the largest, and I think it is the largest collection of Shaker manuscripts, not just music, but all the other documents, the letters, the diaries, histories, and all of that are at Western Reserve Historical Society. And this manuscript indicates what it really was intended for, a dancing song. Right there, it says dancing song. And you'll notice it starts, if you don't know music, I'll tell you, these are two quick notes. They're 16th notes. And so the way you would sing it is, "'Tis the gift to be simple," not "'tis a gift to be simple." I don't know if you can tell the difference. The emphasis is on gift, not "'tis." "'Tis the gift to be simple. 'Tis the gift to be free. 'Tis the gift to come down where we ought to be." That's what should be mentioned. That's what should be stressed. And in this particular version, with the two quick 16th notes, you get what we call an upbeat in music into the next note, which is on gifts, which is the most important word that you want to stress. And that's the way you see it in this particular manuscript from New York State, from the Shaker community in New York State. On the second page, this is the second half of the tune, it says down here, "From Alfred, 1848. It looks like somebody tried to cross that out. But then it says, "Learned of Elder Joseph's company, New Gloucester." Elder Joseph's company, that's Elder Joseph Brackett. So some of his Shaker people that either he traveled with or he instructed would demonstrate this song and dance to it as well. They wouldn't just sing it, they would dance to it. And New Gloucester, of course, is now Sabbath Day Lake. And he was at both communities, both Alfred and New Gloucester, as it was known then. But I think this really indicates that Elder Joseph Brackett was the man who wrote it. Besides, Sister Mildred, who lived at Alfred, where he wrote the song, heard that from the elderly sisters that that looked after her while she was young. So I think it's definitely by Elder Joseph Brackett. That's my feeling. And again, these are transcriptions. On the left is a transcription I did, again, with the two 16th notes. That's how they're showed in modern notation. The two bars on the top are 16th notes. So it's, 'tis a gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. That's the kind of thing I think they were trying to get across in these words to this song, which means so much to many people. Many people have written to me over the years in my various writings about it and expressed how much the song, especially the words, mean to them. And they don't know anything about the Shaker heritage, but they know that this song has great meaning for them. And I think that's why you hear so many different versions of it. It's been done by probably hundreds of people by now, folk people, rock people, classical, all sorts of people have used it, not just Aaron Copland. And I'll tell you, it's also been used in presidential inaugurations. Now, in 1974, that's the year that really is the big celebration we're doing here. There was a bicentennial concert at the Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland in October of 1974. And believe it or not, I found the folder. This is a copy from the folder from 1974. I'm surprised I could find it. But this is the music that was done on the left, a listing of all of the Shaker pieces that were designated. I was the choir director. This was not my presentation entirely. It was done by a professor from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Dr. Daniel Patterson, who was a scholar in Shaker music. And he chose at least the top part of this, the selections at the top that were chosen by him. And I was asked to get a choir together, a community choir, to sing these particular titles, which we did. And then on the second half, these were pieces that I chose, most of the arrangements of Shaker tunes, including Simple Gifts, in which I asked the audience to sing along with us in the chorus. Now, unfortunately, I can't play this. I don't think this will play. No, it's a video. It is on YouTube if you want to look at it. This is a hymn that I did in that particular conference, Celestial Praises. And it's interesting because the designation at the bottom was received by inspiration, January 1841. This was received from the spirit world in January of 1841. Nobody claims there's an author because it was received from the spirit world. But there were times when they mentioned sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so gave me this song from the spirit world. There are very much cases of that kind of transmission going on in the 19th century with the Shakers. A lot of inspirational songs received from the spirit world. And I did an arrangement of it in 1974 and performed by the Canterbury Singers in a concert in 2013. And if you want to actually hear them perform, I have on the a Shaker Music Miscellany from that particular concert in 2013, many of the Shaker pieces that were done, including this one and Simple Gifts. And the music over here is my arrangement. This is not the original. The 4-part arrangement I wrote for chorus, which originally was just the melody only. And this is a picture I got from Brianna, and I thank her for sending this to me. I didn't know this existed, showing when they were at the Shaker Historical Society on November 8th, 1974. And on the left, from left to right, Sister Mildred Barker, Sister Frances Carr, and Dr. Theodore Johnson, who later became Brother Theodore Johnson from Sabbath Day Lake, who were there for a program at the Shaker Historical Society. And I guess afterwards they had the dinner, which was being catered. And that's a nice picture of the three of them who were there. And those are the same three that the next day, November 9th, which was a Saturday, went to a Shaker Heights school, I don't remember which one, for a teacher workshop. And that's when they met Aaron Copland, but not at the teacher workshop. I'll show you the next. This is not at the teacher workshop. This is at a music librarian's home in Shaker Heights. The music librarian, it was a friend of mine. He was at Case Western Reserve, and I used to talk with him a lot, and he was interested in Shaker music. And I told him that Aaron Copland was coming to town, and would it be possible for him to meet the Shakers at his home before Copland spoke to some graduate students? And he graciously agreed. So before he spoke to the graduate students, I was able to introduce him to Sister Mildred Barker. You see there with the fancy bonnet I mentioned, wearing that. And behind her is Dr. Theodore Johnson. And there's a piece of my head there. I was there. And my great wife, Gail, took this picture. So I'm so grateful she did. On 9th of November, 1974. And that's what I said there. And okay. It was quite an occasion. Both the Copland and Sister Mildred were fascinated to talk to each other. Copland was very interested in learning about the song because, of course, it was so identified because of Appalachian Spring. And also, he said it a second time in a vocal version in a collection called Old American Songs. So he did it twice. And I even asked him that in my interview, why he did it a second time. And he said it appealed to him. And that's how he chose his tunes. If a tune appealed to him and he could work with it, he would use it. And that's very sensible. That's the kind of thing I do. I'm a composer too. And that's the way I look at it too. If it appeals to me, I use it. And while he was there, I got him to sign a copy. On the right is a copy of his, it's actually a setting of the vocal version of Simple Gifts that he was graciously willing to sign for Sister Mildred Barker and Sister Frances Carr, and most sincerely and appreciatively, Aaron Copland, 1974, which was very nice of him to do that. And I gave the copy to the Shakers, and it's now at their library in Sabbath Day Lake. I hope it's still there. But after he signed it, I gave it to the Shakers to take back to Sabbath Day Lake. I think certainly they deserve to have it. It's a two-part setting for soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Top part is soprano, alto, bottom is tenor, bass. And it was transcribed for two-part chorus by Irving Fine, who was another composer who was a friend of Aaron Copland, and he said it for chorus. Copland's version originally for solo voice and piano, and then later orchestrated for full orchestra with voice. Now, unfortunately, I can't play this. No. But I just tell you briefly what is said there. It's I'm going to call him brother because that's really what he's known by. Brother Theodore Johnson is saying how pleased they were to be able to meet Aaron Copland just before they came for the teacher workshop. And after he did that, he said, we got to talk about Elder Joseph Brackett's song, "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple." Then they sang the song and asked the teachers who were there to join them in singing. And I was there too, of course. I was singing with them. So we all sang Simple Gifts together, which was quite nice. And they also sang a few other Shaker songs, and I did too. I joined them, of course, because I knew them. And I think that the teachers got quite a bit out of that because they didn't know anything about the Shakers. And it wasn't just about the music. They were talking about their religion and their heritage and their beliefs. And they talked about many different things in their life that I think was helpful for the teachers because perhaps the teachers might have used some of that in their classes. And I know that Simple Gifts is sung in a lot of schoolrooms. If you look on YouTube, you'll even see a lot of people saying, I remember singing that song when I was in say the fifth grade or some early grade. They sang that in school because it was a song that the Music Educators National Conference has said is one of the American songs every American should know. That's the way they classified it. And they had a list of a certain number of songs. I forget how many. It wasn't that many. It was maybe 30 or 40 songs, American songs that every American should know. And that was one of them, Simple Gifts, or 'Tis the Gift to be Simple. Appalachian Spring, I'm sure many of you have heard that. And if you haven't, it's certainly worth hearing, especially in live performance. If the Cleveland Orchestra does it, it's well worth hearing if you haven't heard it before, or on recordings, or certainly online on YouTube, you can hear it. It was first performed in the Library of Congress in Washington with the Martha Graham Dance Company on October 30th, 1944, and included the variations on Simple Gifts tune. It was not sung, of course, it was all instrumental. In 1945, the first recording, as far as I can tell, was made of Appalachian Spring Suite, which was taken from the full ballet and performed by the Boston Symphony, conducted by Serge Koussevitzky. And that same year, Copland received the Pulitzer Prize for that score to Appalachian Spring, and also the New York Music Critics Award for Appalachian Spring. So that particular Shaker song was already famous in 1944-45. It really didn't take off, however, until much later, till the 1960s, thanks mainly to folk singers like Judy Collins and many others. Bill Crowfoot is another one. And there were many folk singers that sang this. I don't believe Bob Dylan did it, but he could have. But in the 60s, folk singers were looking for American folk songs, which this really is. And so they sang it a lot, usually with different words, and sometimes changed some of the words and modernized them. But that's their prerogative as a folk song. But that's really when it started to become really famous. Before that, it was sort of mentioned in passing with Appalachian Spring, and they often called it a Shaker hymn or anonymous Shaker hymn. They didn't know who wrote it, or they didn't know it was a dance song. And just think about it. Appalachian Spring is a ballet. Copland didn't know it was a dance song. He could tell from the way it was written that it had a rhythmic quality that lended itself to dance. And it was a dance song. It was written for dancing. So it's a perfect connection to a ballet like Appalachian Spring. Now, also, it became much popular later and was performed at 3 presidential inaugurations for 2 different political parties. First, for President Ronald Reagan in 1985, sung by opera singer Jesse Norman. He was a Republican, of course. And second, for President Bill Clinton in 1993, sung by another opera singer, Marilyn Horne. And of course, Clinton was a Democrat. And then we have the third time for President Barack Obama in 2009, but not Copland's arrangement of Simple Gifts. It was done by the great film composer, John Williams, who did a piece he called Air and Simple Gifts. Simple Gifts is part of his arrangement. And that was not a vocal. That was done for a string quartet, or I mean, a chamber group of woodwinds and piano. It was clarinet, violin, cello, and piano. I think that was the makeup of the instruments. No singing, just the playing. And some of these may still be on YouTube if you want to look at them. And I mentioned I interviewed Copland in July of 1980, and I can tell you a little bit about getting to his house. And he lived in upstate New York, and I was in Massachusetts. I drove there in my little air-conditioned car. I had a little Volkswagen Rabbit, and it was about 100 degrees. And it was a really tough trip to get to his house. But once I got to his house and I was exhausted, he welcomed me graciously and he brought me into his air conditioned room, which I was so grateful for. And we spent the whole afternoon talking about his music, not just about the Shaker arrangement he did, but other music as well, his film music, which I'm also very interested in, and some of his other music. And I spent a wonderful afternoon speaking with Aaron Copland. I always treasure that day I spent speaking with him. But of course, he was 80 years old at this time, so his memory was failing. And when I would ask him about something related to it that happened 40 years before, he would not remember, of course. He would say, I don't remember. And I would say, well, I read it. And he would jokingly say, well, if you read it, it must be true. I don't trust my memory anymore. And I understand that feeling because I'm about the same age now as he was, and I forget things too. So I certainly sympathize with that feeling. But I've always admired him as a composer because he wrote a lot of American tunes, not just the Shaker tune, but cowboy tunes in his ballets, Rodeo and Billy the Kid. But and also Fanfare for the Common Man. Many great American compositions were written by Aaron Copland, and certainly Appalachian Spring is one of those, and certainly deserves to be played over and over again. And again, if you want to listen to the complete interview I had related to Simple Gifts, it's on this DVD collection, the Shaker Music Miscellany. I also wrote an article for the Bulletin of the Society for American Music, or SAM as it's abbreviated, in spring of 2019, and it's titled Aaron Copland's Simple Gifts. And this is part of what I wrote. I'll just read the whole thing. How and why did Copland choose to use the Simple Gift song in his Appalachian String Ballet score? I asked Copland those questions in a lengthy interview with him at his home on July 21st, 1980. He said that he had, quote, found a book in a library and the book had the title of that Shaker song. So naturally looked at that tune in the book. And in fact, the title of the book by Edward Deming Andrews, published in 1940, was The Gift to Be Simple. So he saw that title. He said, I wonder if there's a tune with that title. And sure enough, there was. And that's what he used. Copland also said he had heard about the Shakers from Martha Graham, and she knew about the Shakers because of the dancing, I think, the connection to the dancing, and was curious about their music after she told him about it. So he went and found that book. And that particular book, by the way, is still at the library. It's in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I know that because I went there with my wife on vacation. I stopped in the area and I went to the Pittsfield Public Library, went into I think it's the rare book room, and saw that book still being there, just like Aaron Copland saw it. So it was quite a surprise for me to see the actual book that Copland actually found at that library. And going on, it says, it's very curious. This is what Copland said. It's very curious. It's kind of an instinctive feeling of empathy with a tune. I can play a tune out of a collection and think, gee, this is a very good tune, but I could never work with it. I can't tell you why. I'm just not that interested, or there is something about it that puts me off a bit. Or on the other hand, I'll play something and immediately I'll know, oh, that I could work with. It's hard to analyze, really. And as I said, I have the same feeling when I'm looking for a tune to set to music. It's the same thing. It's a tune that appeals to me, unless I had a commission, of course, then I'd have to use a tune. But if I'm choosing a tune on my own, just like Copland, Martha Graham did not tell him he had to use that Shaker tune. She just said, look at the Shaker music and see what you find. And he chose the tune on his own. And at the end, it says, Graham also sensed the importance of the Shakers and Copland's use of the tune in Appalachian Spring when she said that section where Simple Gifts appears would stay with people and give them great joy. I don't know if you've ever seen the ballet done. It is available on video of Martha Graham that she did years later. But many people, when that particular tune comes on in the ballet, people do perk up because they recognize that tune. It's very noticeable, and it probably does give them great joy if you like the tune to hear that tune that you remember. Now, this I can't play, but this is on, I believe it's still on YouTube, sung by Marilyn Horne with the U.S. Marine Band at the United States presidential inauguration of President Bill Clinton, and the arrangement by Aaron Copland. And I don't know if Bill Clinton suggested the tune or Marilyn Horne. I think Marilyn Horne suggested it because she liked to sing this in her concerts, Copland's arrangement of Simple Gifts. So I think maybe it was her choice, and Aaron Copland, I guess, was no, he wasn't alive then, so he couldn't have heard it. Uh, but Bill Clinton liked the song, from what I have read, that he thought it was a nice tune. And that was done at the inauguration ceremonies. And as far as I know, Simple Gifts is the only American religious song that has been done in three different presidential inaugurations. Of course, most of the time it's a patriotic song, America the Beautiful, or My Country 'Tis of Thee, or Battle Hymn of the Republic, or something like that. But the Simple Gifts was done in three of the presidential inaugurations. So that's kind of a record for that simple Shaker song. Now, the folk arrangements, there are many that have been done. These are two copies of the LPs that came out in the 60s and 1970. The top one on the right is just called Simple Gifts, and is performed and sung by a husband and wife team who played a dulcimer. You can see that on their lap. They're playing a folk instrument called a dulcimer, George and Jerry Armstrong. And they produced what I believe is the first LP recording of a folk arrangement of Simple Gifts in 1961. So that was quite early for the song to be recorded. And I think they are the first ones to put out an LP in which they sang their arrangement of the song, accompanied by dulcimer. A very simple arrangement, too. And then later, the one that's probably best known to many people is the one by Judy Collins, who is still performing, I believe, and still gives concerts. And she did it several times. The first time I'm aware that she did it, I have it on a video from 1963 from a television show where she accompanies herself on a guitar and sings the song very simply and changes some of the words. This is something that folk singers often do. They modernize some of the words because the words may sound archaic to people. And so a lot of times folk singers will change the words to make it into more modern terminology. And 1970, I believe, the LP shown at the bottom, Judy Collins called Whales and Nightingales. It actually has whale sounds on it, and she sings a song about whales. But she also does a very nice simple arrangement of Simple Gifts for guitar, auto harp, and recorder, I believe. And she sings in a very simple way. And the Sabbath Day Lay Shakers have liked her arrangement better than almost any they have heard. At least in the past, they told me that, because it is so simple. Particularly Sister Mildred liked it because it was simple. But that is a very popular version that has been done, not just by Judy Collins, but many others. And another way that this tune has been used is a separate new song called Lord of the Dance. Now, some of you may know that, may have heard that either in a church or in a concert hall, or there is actually a dance extravaganza called Lord of the Dance. Michael Flatley is the choreographer, I believe, who has been called Lord of the Pants. Unfortunately, he gets the information about it all wrong. I don't even think he calls it a Shaker song, but if he does, he says it's anonymous. or it was written by a friend of his. And actually, it wasn't. It was written by an English songwriter and poet named Sidney Carter, who is no longer alive. But I actually wrote to Sidney Carter, and he sent me back a very nice letter thanking me for remembering him and asking him about how he came to write the Simple Gifts tune. Only the tune he took and added his own words and arranged it for chorus. Lord of the Dance. That's an article I wrote for a Shaker magazine where I tell about how that was written. Actually, he wrote the song, I think it was in 1963. So again, he was more or less a folk singer and composer. And he was in England, of course. He was a British songwriter. And this has been done, the song, Lord of the Dance, has been done in many schools in England and maybe here too, I don't know, because you can actually dance to it. I mean, if you've ever seen a performance in the Boston area, there's a group called the Revels, and they have done it at their intermission every year. And they dance around and they dance out into the lobby, and the audience joins them. It's sort of a gathering of all people that join them singing and dancing to this song, Lord of the Dance, which is based on the Simple Gifts tune. There is a copy of his, or a setting of his arrangement, and on the top left is the autograph that he wrote to me with grateful thanks, Sidney Carter, September 3rd, 1997. And he was very pleased that not only that I wrote to him about it, but also I told him something about the Shakers and the song, which he didn't know. He told me he had heard the song at a folk festival in England, and he liked the tune so much that he found it and then he arranged it with his original words. I think there's 5 or 6 verses that he wrote. Those are all his own verses. They're not Shaker verses, but he used the Shaker tune as the basis for his song, Lord of the Dance. And this particular thing has been done in church services, in concert halls, in schools. So it has really been a worldwide phenomenon, as well as the dance extravaganza, which has probably been shown all over the world. And they've made videos on it and everything. Michael Flatley, I think, is the man behind that. And there's a picture of Sidney Carter on the right. You very seldom see any pictures of him, even though he's well known in England because he wrote other folk tunes that were used in school. He's not well known here. And so I was very pleased I was able to reach him. As you see, his dates 1915 to 2004. I told him something very interesting, which he was, I'm sure, amazed to hear. He was born on May 6th, 1915, the same date as Elder Joseph Brackett, who was also born on May 6th. And I told him that, and he said, that's amazing that he was born, and he was very pleased that he was born on the same date as the man who wrote Simple Gifts. So that's quite a coincidence. And as I say, it's gone on to worldwide fame. And a very good recording was made of the medley of Simple Gifts and Lord of the Dance by Benjamin Luxon, who's an opera singer, and Bill Crofut, who is a folk singer. And the way that works, it's actually a video you can watch on YouTube. There's the link. It starts out with Benjamin Luxon singing the Shaker song, "'Tis the Gift to Be Simple," and then it goes into Lord of the Dance with, I think, Bill Crofut doing it. And eventually they go through Lord of the Dance, which has 6 verses of text. So it's a combination of the two songs together, and it's very effectively done. And they did that in concerts in various places around all over America, I would guess. I don't think either one of them are still living, but the recording, I believe, is still available. The recording is on a CD, Omega CD. I'm not sure that's still available, but you can watch the YouTube. There's the link there, and you can watch it. At way it begins, if that's the right one, it starts out 'Tis a gift to be simple. And that kind of bothers me. And I'll explain why. I have a little bit of time here. I'll explain why. The Shakers, you think, well, 'tis a gift or 'tis the gift. What's the difference? It's a difference. There's 'tis a gift implies any gift. 'Tis the gift is the gift to be simple. It's to be simple. That's the gift. It's not any gift. That is the gift to be simple. 'Tis the gift to be simple. 'Tis the gift to be free. 'Tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. Not, and sometimes they say where you ought to be. Okay, that's okay. That's certainly a legitimate change to make. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we shan't be ashamed. Now, guess what that is? That's a dance instruction, to bow and to bend. That's where the Shakers would bow and bend. Most people miss that when they look at the words of Simple Gifts, but it's definitely, that's a dance instruction. To bow and to bend, we shan't be ashamed. Till by turning, another dance instruction, we come round right. Till by turning, we come round right. So the words of the song are part of the dance instruction. So if you don't remember anything I'm saying here, please remember that it was a Shaker dance song. I would be grateful if you repeat that somewhere along the line. If you're a teacher, if you are involved in church work or concert work, or just to your friends, if they like the song, just tell them it was a dance song by Elder Joseph Brackett. And I'd be grateful for that. Now, it's not over yet. We come to the little advertisement section. Sorry for this. This is a CD I produced some years ago with the Canterbury Singers, directed by Catherine Southworth, an excellent director in New Hampshire, which features original Shaker tunes and also arrangements by me and Conrad Held, who was a musician, a violinist, or violist, excuse me, a violist who lived in Massachusetts, and he arranged some Shaker tunes. And I found the collection that he had published, and we did all of them. I think there are about 15 arrangements for voice and piano. If there are any singers listening to this, you might check that out because they're really beautiful arrangements that Conrad Hell did of the Shaker songs. 15 Shaker songs. That's the title of the collection. But also some of my arrangements, and I did a couple of original compositions to poems by Sister Mildred Barker. She also wrote poems when she was very young, which she was surprised that I was set to music. She called them her poor little poems. And I told her they're not poor. They're not at all poor, and they're not so little. In my mind, they're very big because they say a lot in a few words. So I was happy to be able to set a couple of her poems. They're included on this particular CD, but of course, Simple Gifts is included in my arrangement of it for this chorus, the Canterbury Singers. So you can check this out online. I think I have a link coming up here if you're interested. It is still available, but there are limited copies because it came out a number of years ago, and many copies were sold. And this is what I was going to play. This is the Canterbury Singers singing my arrangement of Simple Gifts in a 2013 concert in Concord, New Hampshire. This was done after we did the CD. We introduced it at this church in Concord. I believe it's the church where Catherine Southworth is the music director, and it was well received there with the Canterbury Singers doing a concert of Shaker music. And she also was kind enough to do, I did an extensive piano piece, variations on Shaker marching tune, 7 variations for piano, solo piano, a modernistic work, which she played and recorded on the Celestial Praises CD. So if you're interested in modern music, you might listen to that piece. That is also on YouTube. You can watch it. Another CD I'll mention, um, Simple Gifts, recorded in 1976 by the Plymouth Church Choir of Shaker Heights, I mentioned earlier. They are featured on this other CD, Gentle Words, a Shaker music sampler. But this also includes an excerpt of the Aaron Copland interview from 1980. And also, I believe Sister Mildred is featured on here. Yes, her singing is on here. And also the Copland arrangement of Simple Gifts. So there's quite a bit about Simple Gifts on this particular CD. Many of these selections are the original tunes. The beginning, the first about 13 or 14, are mostly the original Shaker tunes that have not been arranged in any way. And when I worked on this, I was the consultant for Plymouth Church. When I worked with John Herr on this, I said to him, I would like to have a lot of the original tunes so people can hear what the original tunes sound like. And then we can do arrangements also, so the choir would be happy. Choir likes to do arrangements, of course. Um, so it's a mixture of original Shaker tunes and arranged harmonized Shaker tunes. So it's a mixture of pieces. And also my variations for piano is on there. So there's quite a bit on there. Plus, I should mention, there are some of my interviews with the Shakers, not only in Maine, but also in Canterbury, New Hampshire, which was the first place I went to and interviewed a couple of Shaker sisters there. This was way back around 1972 when I was at Binghamton University for my master's degree. I was working on Shaker music notation, and I was able to interview a couple of Shaker sisters. And since I have a few minutes here, I want to tell you a little bit about that because that's really what got me going. I wasn't sure I was even going to work on a topic of Shaker music, but I asked my advisor, I said, I'm looking for a topic to do because we had to do something on music. And I said, what can I do? Do you have any suggestions? And he said, why don't you look at Shaker music? And I said, what's that? I never heard of it. And he said, well, he had a student when he was at the University of North Carolina teaching a class who did work on Shaker music, and he was quite impressed with it. And he thought that I might find it appealing. So I said, okay, I'll look into it. So I started looking around and buying books, and I bought the Edward Andrews book, and I looked at some other books. And then I found out that there are still Shakers surviving, which I didn't know and honestly didn't expect. And I found that there were two Shaker communities still surviving, and that was Canterbury, New Hampshire, and Sabbath Day Lake, Maine. And I wrote to Canterbury first, and they at first turned me down, and I wondered why. And I talked to my advisor about it. I was quite upset about it. And he said, well, maybe they thought you were a journalist because they had many journalists that would write negative articles about them in newspapers and magazines. And they probably thought you were a journalist. And he suggested I write to him again and explain what I wanted to do. So I did that. And then they accepted me and said, come on, we'd be glad to have you. They spent 2 days talking with me, singing lots of Shaker music, and it was just a wonderful experience. And fortunately, I have taped that, and it still exists, and it's on a Shaker Music Miscellany and other CDs or portions of them, including this Gentle Words. So if you're interested in hearing what the Shakers have to say about their music and singing a couple, then you might want to check these out. The Shakers are not professional singers, of course, they're folk singers, so don't expect them to sound operatic or anything like that. They sing in a very honest way, which I honestly like. When I did my singing, I tried to sing in an honest way as also. I was never a real, full-time concert singer. I used to sing in a lot of lectures that I gave and workshops just to demonstrate the music. So, I mean, I agree that singing it in a direct way, especially with folk music like this, is very important. So that's what I tried to follow in my own performances over the years. But I always remembered that time, and I can tell you, one of the sisters I spoke with, her name was Sister Lillian Phelps. She was 95 years old. Now, who can do anything when you're 95? You can maybe get out of a chair, but not much else. She went to the piano. She was a pianist primarily. She went to the piano and asked the other Shaker sister, what key is that in when she wanted to sing a hymn or a song? And she would told, let's say, A flat. She would just play it. It was all memorized. I just sat there with my mouth open. I couldn't believe she had memorized all of that music because she had played it for many years. And she just had that gift of memory. At 95, she still remembered the music and she just played it away. And that was an amazing experience I never forgot. And so that initial experience, that's the first time I talked to any Shakers in person. And then later I went to Sabbath Day Lake and I met Sister Mildred Barker, Sister Frances Carr, and Brother Theodore Johnson and other Shakers. It was just continual uh, happy time for me when I went to see the Shakers and hear their music because it was just a joy for me to listen and to learn. I often learned new songs from them, from their singing. And it was just something that I just enjoyed doing. It wasn't a job, it was an enjoyable experience. And again, this is the music that Aaron Copland signed in 1974. And it was November the 9th, which at that time I think was a Saturday in 1974. So it's very close to what we're doing here today. And again, this picture, which is a little blurred, it's been blown up. It was actually a color slide that my wife took. Fortunately, she was able to get the picture because that's really the only picture that exists of Aaron Copland meeting Sister Mildred Barker. And then the sources, if you're interested in other material, I mentioned the Edward Deming Andrews book, published in paperback by Dover. Um, and also, I'm not sure you can get this, Shaker Quarterly. That was a publication that the Shakers produced about their own heritage. And Sister Mildred wrote an article, History of Union Branch, Gorham, Maine, with the dates, in which she mentions Elder Joseph Brackett and Simple Gifts. But she's talking about that community that she was writing about. The Shakers were also somewhat of historians. They often wrote about their early history, which I think is very significant. Not just the music, but also their religious heritage as well. And talk many times about the past Shakers that they knew about and they read about. The Aaron Copland book, Copland since 1943, is his autobiography that he did with Vivian Perlis, which I think is still available, in which he talks about uh, Appalachian Spring. And I have to say, when that book first came out, the quote that was used was from my publication, and and I was not given credit, as sometimes happens. And so I wrote to the author and I said, what happened? And she apologized profusely and said she didn't know that. And in the next edition, it would be corrected. And it was. So I was grateful for that. But the way that happened was when I interviewed Aaron Copland, I brought my publication about Simple Gifts and gave it to him. And she saw that when she was working with him on his book, on his autobiography. So that's the reason she quoted from it. So that's how that happened. And then there are my two books I mentioned, Simple Gifts, Great American Folk Song, Multimedia, which is the book, if you're just interested in the book, that's available as a PDF, which you can get online. Could be sent by email if you're interested in that way. Or if you want the music and the videos, you'd have to get the DVD version. And the other book, Gentle Words, The Meaning and Message of Shaker Music. That is as a book with the lyrics to 25 Shaker spirituals. There's also a CD with that title, Gentle Words, which has the same 25 Shaker spirituals. In the book is only the words, the lyrics. On the CD is the music. So if you have the book and the CD, you have it all, if you're interested. Also in the back of the book, I did an arrangement of 4 Shaker tunes for chorus, if anybody's interested in that. If you're a choir director or a musician, you might be interested in that. And then there is a book by Daniel Patterson. I mentioned he's the one who did the conference in October of 1974. And he did a book years later called The Shakers Spiritual, published in 1979. It's a huge book, and I think it's out in paperback. It may still be available. But it's a very good book. There's a lot of information about many different types of Shaker music. There are many different categories of Shaker music. There are dance songs, gift songs, uh, greeting songs, all sorts of hymns, anthems, many different categories of music. It has been estimated, well over 20,000 tunes and texts. That's an incredible output. But you have to realize it goes from the 1780s to 1959. That's a long period of time. Now, during the 20th century, they were not writing a lot of music. It was mostly doing the earlier music. They were reviving it. And this is another thing that interests me as a music preservationist. They were preserving the music from their past by bringing it out and singing it, and in some cases, even publishing some of it. Some of the hymnals, for example, have been reprinted by them. So they are, in a sense, preserving their music heritage, which appeals to me as a music preservationist. So they've done a lot in their history with their music, which is something that I really appreciate greatly in the over 40 years I've been working on it. So I'll just say at the bottom there is a link to the Center for American Music Preservation, the Shaker Music page. If you want to look at that, there's quite a bit about the music that I can't get into here. So you can look at its the website is americanmusicpreservation.com. And then the page is shakermusic.htm. There's actually a number of pages dealing with Shaker music that I've worked on over the years. So you can read more about some of the things, and there are music examples I think that you can listen to that hopefully will play. uh, okay, now if we have any questions.
Roger, I want to thank you for that. And also just note that I am going to try to get some links from Roger that I can add to the description to the YouTube channel. So hopefully you'll be able to watch some of those, listen to some of those, since we missed out during the presentation.